Someone calls you unexpectedly and your stomach drops. Not because anything is wrong, not because you don't like them, just because it's a phone call. And now you have to think, respond, react, all in real time, with no ability to edit, no time to gather your thoughts, no exit. But a text you can handle. You can think before you respond. You can say exactly what you mean. You can even put the phone down and come back when you're ready. And everyone around you acts like that makes you antisocial, rude, avoidant. But here's what nobody's telling you. The preference for texting over talking isn't a personality flaw. It's a psychological profile. And science has a lot to say about why your brain works this way. Let's start with how you actually process information. Psychologists identify two broad communication styles: real-time processors, who think by talking, who need the back and forth of live conversation to work through their thoughts, and delayed processors, who need time and space before they can articulate what they actually mean. If you prefer texting, there's a strong chance you're a delayed processor. You don't think slower. You think more carefully. You need the gap between stimulus and response to actually formulate something worth saying. On a call, that gap doesn't exist. Someone asks you something, and the silence feels unbearable, not just to them, but to you, so you rush. You say something half-formed. You hang up and immediately think of what you actually wanted to say. Sound familiar? That's not social failure. That's just your brain needing a little more runway. But there's another layer here, and it has everything to do with control. Phone calls are unpredictable. You don't know where they're going. You can't see the other person's face. You can't gauge their reaction before you finish your sentence. For people who have any level of anxiety, even low-grade everyday anxiety, that unpredictability is genuinely uncomfortable. Texting removes most of that uncertainty. You send a message, you wait, you see their response before you have to react to it. The entire interaction becomes something you can manage instead of something that's happening to you. Researchers call this asynchronous communication preference, and studies show it's significantly higher in people who score above average on measures of social anxiety. This isn't weakness. It's your nervous system trying to protect you from a kind of stress that feels very real, even when the stakes are low. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Some of this goes back further than you think. The way you learn to communicate as a child has a direct effect on how safe you feel in unscripted conversations as an adult. If you grew up in an environment where saying the wrong thing had real consequences, where reactions were unpredictable, where you had to read the room before you could speak freely, your brain learned to slow down before responding. That caution was adaptive. It kept you safe. And now, even in completely low-stakes situations, that same system is still running. Texting feels safer because it replicates that buffer, that pause before the consequence arrives. For a lot of people who prefer texting, it isn't about the technology at all. It's about the emotional architecture that was built long before smartphones existed. And then there's the neuroscience. Phone calls demand something text conversations simply don't. When you're on a call, your brain is simultaneously decoding language, interpreting tone, managing your own emotional response, formulating a reply, and monitoring silence all at once. That's a significant cognitive load. Research in cognitive neuroscience shows that real-time verbal communication activates more regions of the brain simultaneously than written communication does. For people whose nervous systems are already running a little hot, that added load isn't just uncomfortable, it's genuinely exhausting. Texting, by contrast, lets your brain work sequentially. Read, think, respond. One thing at a time. It's not that calls are too much for you. It's that your brain is doing more with them than other people realize. Now, it's worth being honest about something, because there's a difference between preferring texts and using texts to disappear. If texting is how you communicate most comfortably, that's completely valid. But if texting has become the way you avoid every difficult conversation, every relationship that requires presence, every moment that asks something real of you, that's worth looking at. Peace and avoidance can feel identical from the inside. The question isn't whether you prefer texting. The question is whether that preference is serving your life or quietly shrinking it. But for the majority of people who default to texts, this isn't avoidance. It's precision. You're not antisocial. You're not rude. You're not bad at communication. You actually care more about communication than most people do. That's why you want to get it right. That's why the unedited chaos of a phone call feels like a setup to say something you don't mean. You'd rather take 3 minutes to send a message that actually reflects what's in your head than spend 3 minutes on a call, leaving the other person with a version of you that was just reacting. There's something genuinely thoughtful about that. Most people just never frame it that way. So the next time someone makes you feel strange for saying, "Just text me," remember, you're not avoiding connection. You're just choosing the format where you can actually show up fully. And that's not something to apologize for. If this felt like someone finally put words to something you've always known about yourself, subscribe. Because that's exactly what this channel does. And if you want to go even deeper, the psychology of people who process everything internally explains why your inner world is a lot louder and more complex than anyone around you realizes. Click it. You'll understand yourself a little better by the end.